everyone. My name is Monica Ricosi. Welcome to the Fashion and Sustainability Summit. The 2020 series is a collaboration of Fashion Dex and LIM College. The summit is sponsored by EcoLife Yarns, producing sustainable yarns for over 60 years, as well as Kendor Textiles Limited, specializing in environmentally friendly, responsible textiles, and the Accessories Council. Today is week 13, and we are about to have a conversation on sustainability at Allbirds. With us, we have speaker Hana Kajimura. We have 4 moderators today: Jordana Guimaras of Fashion Innovation, Andrea Kennedy of Fashion Dex and LIM College, Juliet Jones of LIM College, and Rebecca Margolis of Fashion Dex. With that being said, I'd like to turn this over now to our moderator, Jordana. Jordana, please unmute and take it away.
Thank you so much for having me here. And first off, I want to congratulate just Fashion Dex and LIM College for this incredible summit. And it's been fascinating what you've been able to put together and really knowledge-filled. So first, thank you for having me. And I'm Jordana Guimaras, I'm the co-founder of Fashion Innovation. And I am thrilled to introduce Hana Kajimura. I don't want to say it wrong. She's the Sustainability Manager at Allbirds. And I would love for you to start off by just giving a brief introduction of yourself and the background of what you're doing with Allbirds and just you in general.
Cool. Yeah, thanks so much for having us. Hello, everyone. As Jordana said, my name's Hana Kajimura, and I lead sustainability at Allbirds. Allbirds is a carbon neutral lifestyle brand with a mission to make better things in a better way. And for us, that means innovating around natural materials that have largely been overlooked in the footwear and apparel space, as well as in our supply chain to try to reduce our carbon footprint. Allbirds is a fairly young company. We were founded back in 2016, so 4 to 5 years ago. And we became a public benefit corporation and a certified B Corp pretty quickly. So we really have a stakeholder-based approach to business. And as you can imagine, starting at a small company with a small team, my role is sustainability in every sense of that word. So it's both the social and environmental impact of our business, as high level as setting climate targets and strategy, and as tactical as sorting the trash bins at the end of the day. So there's really never a dull moment, but it's a really great job.
I would love to know, with sustainability having so many definitions by different people, how does Allbirds approach sustainability?
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest challenges. We found ourselves in this interesting position where from day one, our founders came to start the business with a mission to protect the environment. And at the same time, we were starting everything from scratch. So sustainability can mean 30 different things. And like, how do we do all of those things at once? Or do we? Because I think we really believe that we'd rather do a few things really well than 30 things poorly. And so it means focusing. And this realization that Allbirds was founded in reaction to a very specific observation, which is that our shoes are mostly made from plastics. And plastics come from oil, and oil is driving climate change. And climate change, we believe, is really the #1 issue of our generation. And so that's kind of our, like, the tip of the spear for us in terms of our strategic priority. And we specifically measure and track carbon emissions in order to measure our progress against climate change, while kind of holding all of these other aspects of sustainability in mind and making sure that we're acting responsibly. And the way that we do that is through our B Corp certification. So every couple of years, we have to go through a rigorous assessment of like 300 questions across every area of our business to just make sure that we are walking the talk in all aspects of sustainability, even though maybe our public-facing message is quite focused on climate change.
That's super cool. Congratulations. The brand is amazing. And as far, you mentioned plastic, so can you share any exciting materials that you guys are currently working with? And with those materials? How does that lower the impact of the styles that's being created?
Yeah. So specifically our mission is around natural materials and elevating those in place of synthetics. And so we have taken over time this very systematic approach of trying to like find plastics in footwear and figure out the right replacement for them. In a lot of cases, that just means repurposing materials that already exist. So using wool in footwear for the first time in a major way, noting that despite this perception that like natural materials are not strong enough or durable enough for footwear, that wool actually had a lot of natural capabilities that work really well in footwear, like that it reduces odor and regulates temperature. And then next we moved on to the tree platform, which is a tencel fiber. Again, something that has been around in clothing, has never really been used in footwear in a major way, and brought that into our shoe for like a more of the summertime, like warmer weather use case. And then the third major material platform that we have is called sugar, or the material we call sweet foam, which was up until wool and tree, we like to say that our shoe was or we didn't like to say it, but our shoe was 2/3 good, where the upper was a natural material, the insole, so the insert inside your shoe, was a castor-based foam, but then the outsole was still a petroleum-based EVA sneaker foam. And that we strongly believe in progress over perfection, but certainly not resting on your laurels. And we really needed to find a better solution for that, for the outsole part of the shoe. But everything that existed from a natural material standpoint often degraded the performance. It made it heavier, denser, clunkier, less comfortable. And so we actually worked with a partner in Brazil to manufacture a sugarcane-based alternative to that material. So chemically identical, but rather than using oil as the input, using sugarcane. And we're able to find this like no compromises approach where we're using natural materials and actually created a carbon negative resin without compromising on performance for the shoe.
That's so cool. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to let Andrea take over from here.
Thank you, Jordana. Hana, this has been amazing. And I'm really excited about that carbon negative, right? Sugarcane substitute alternative you were talking about. And you're right. You know, a lot of people do think that fashion can be clunky or just like no color and no shape. So I'm glad that you actually talked about that. But let's stick with that carbon negative thing. I want to chat a little bit about carbon. Those who know me know that like I'm always working towards fossil fuel free fashions and footwear. So, and you are amazingly in that space. So in terms of climate action, and working towards, you know, you talk a lot about on your website, and when I've seen you chat before, about carbon footprints, right? So like, what are some of the initiatives other than the material ones you were just talking about to work towards carbon reduction?
Yeah, so ultimately our aspiration is, in the simplest terms, to make our business like a tree, where trees are naturally sucking in carbon dioxide and they're purifying the air and returning oxygen. And so at a high level, like, we want to be leaving the world the environment in a better place than we found it. The industry, as we know, is a long way from that ultimate North Star, but we have a 3-part strategy to get there. So the first part is to measure our carbon footprint, which we believe is really important because you can't reduce or improve upon what you don't measure. Second is to reduce that carbon footprint as much as possible, driving it to zero over time. And then the third part is to offset. So to make ourselves a carbon neutral business across all of our emissions, from the sheep on farms in New Zealand all the way through to our employees commuting to work. And to do that today. we started committing to that last year in 2019. But for us, it's really important to do in parallel with the reduction, because the two can help each other out. Obviously, we would like to not be paying for our, we'd like to be paying less for our carbon footprint. And so by imposing essentially a carbon tax upon ourselves, we're creating a mechanism to incentivize a reduction in our carbon footprint. And for reduction specifically, we look very methodically, because we're measuring the carbon footprint of each product across the major categories of its life cycle, including materials, manufacturing, transportation, use, so customer use and care, and then end of life. We can kind of look within each of those stacks and identify opportunities for reduction, whether it's less waste on the materials side, recycling waste, more energy efficient manufacturing in countries that have a more renewable grid mix, designing products that don't require a lot of customer use and care. And so we probably have a list of 20 goals for each product that we're working to reduce over time.
Wow, amazing. Thank you so much. And you're right that nature is our blueprint, right? So
yeah,
that's what
we can learn so much just by following the natural patterns of the world.
Exactly. Biomimicry. The students here today would know that from our classes. So thank you. Let's stick with carbon for a moment. And what I'm really excited about, and I have followed Allbirds for a while now, and your work, is the new recently launched carbon footprint initiative, where you are committed to putting the carbon label on all the products that you produce and sell, right? So can you tell us about that, your carbon labeling?
Yeah, so as I was saying, we've been measuring the carbon footprint for a number of years now as an internal design and development tool to know how to design for a lower carbon footprint. And just had this realization of, if we have the numbers already, why don't we make them public? For two reasons. One is to hold ourselves accountable, because the second we put something out there, you better believe we're going to work our butts off to try to reduce that number. And to start this industry-wide conversation, because how can we expect customers to make better decisions for the climate or responsible decisions when they have no information besides what the brand sustainability tagline is? This is a sustainable product, this is made with recycled materials, but that's all up to the brand's marketing team and how good it is. And we thought that by publishing this really objective, unifying metric, we could simplify the conversation a bit. Now, it doesn't mean a whole lot if just Allbirds is doing it, because of course you want to know not just how does the Allbirds shoe compare to other shoes, but you want to know, how does my Allbirds shoe compare to the sandwich I ate for lunch compared to the bicycle I bought this year. And what we need is for the general public to develop this kind of relational understanding for carbon footprints and daily budgets and that kind of thing that we do for calories, for example. A calorie is also a very scientific unit of measure that most of us couldn't define what it is, but we know that less is better, and we generally know how much we can have in a day, and that allows us to make informed decisions. And the reason that we have that understanding is because nutrition labels are regulated and are so ubiquitous that we have been able to understand them over time. So that's really the ultimate goal here, is to encourage other companies to get into the conversation. And I do think it's happening a little bit in our industry. I've seen some smaller brands kind of come up with those numbers. But in the broader industry, the broader world as well. Like Unilever has made a commitment around carbon footprint labeling. Logitech in electronics has done it too. And so I think we're seeing a bit of momentum there, which is really exciting.
It is exciting, but it's a lot of systemic change across all those industries. Interface Carpet, I think, does it too.
Yeah.
But yeah. So, oh my gosh, thank you so much. So I am now going to bounce it to Rebecca Margolis, who is from LIM College and Fashion Dex. So Rebecca, you're on.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca. Like Andrea just said, I'm the Sustainability Coordinator intern at Fashion Dex, and I'm also a student at LIM. So this is very exciting for a lot of reasons. But first of all, I'd like to kind of shift the conversation to the more social aspect of sustainability. So, since the umbrella of sustainability, if you will, covers so many different avenues, how do you ensure that the social aspect or workers are being treated in the best way possible at Allbirds specifically?
And I think that goes back, it's a really important question and goes back to, I think, the first question, which is that we fully expect our sustainability strategy and our priorities to morph over time as the realities of the business shift. And from the starting point, Allbirds is in a pretty unique situation because we have such few products. Like we started with one shoe, and as a result, we have only a couple factories that work for us, whereas many fashion brands have dozens or even hundreds. And so our approach has really been to leverage, build these like deep multi-year relationships with our factories where we've been there for 5 years now. We have full-time employees there. Our employees are going over, or were pre-COVID going over there like once a month. And we leverage third-party social and labor best practices and certifications for those factories. Now, of course, as our business expands, as we add more products and thus more supply chain partners, our approach will have to change. But to date, we've just really relied on that like human trust and relationship supported by third-party standards when it comes to the social side.
Yeah, it's I would argue one of the most crucial parts for sure.
Yeah.
So on to the next question. This one we kind of already talked about, but I'm wondering if you could elaborate. So basically, my question is, what actions are taken to avoid greenwashing within the marketing mix? So I noticed that, like, I know I see a lot of influencers with Allbirds, and I see a lot of ads, like, in my cookies, if you will. But how do you ensure that the message isn't getting lost? Like, how do you ensure that there is no greenwashing?
Yeah, I think it starts with, again, like the very privilege. We're growing a lot, but it wasn't too long ago that we were all 50 people sitting in one room, and that kind of spirit has really stuck with us through growth, where I would like sit across from our PR team or like next to our brand marketing team, and we have this like really close personal and collaborative relationship where I'm editing and writing all of the copy that goes up on the website with help from the marketing team. And they just really respect the integrity of sustainability. And then we find kind of creative ways to deliver a clean message, but then support it with all of the necessary caveats and facts that my team feels are important to communicate as well. So for example, like if you look at our carbon footprint page on our website, like we are delivering the marketing taglines of like carbon neutral shoe, like this is the carbon footprint, but then there's a link to like a 5-page methodology document that explains like, here are the assumptions that we made and here's where we're a little less certain. And I think that the respect from the marketing team to be able to, of the sustainability team to say like, hey, that's gone a little bit too far. We're no longer comfortable with that. And to be that I get to be involved at every step of the process is really what gives me a lot of confidence in our ability to avoid greenwashing. And then secondly, that like, at least as I talk to my peers at other companies, it's such a unique position where the marketing team is constantly like, what stories can we tell? Like, we want to talk about sustainability. Like, tell me what I can say. How should I say it? And that is so different than a marketing team potentially at a big company, like watching trends and then coming back and saying like, we need an ocean's plastic story. Like, what can you give us? And so I think a lot of that stems from being a smaller team, but at least so far has really carried as we've grown in size.
Awesome. That's so nice to hear, because I feel like we've talked about this every week since the beginning, but collaboration is just so important at this point. And it sounds like Allbirds just really embodies that collaborative team. And that's so nice. Over to Juliet.
Hi, everyone. Like she said, I'm Juliet. I'm from LIM College. And my first question for you is, if you were to advise students or new brands just starting out in their work in sustainability, where would you say is the best place to get started in the sustainability journey?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think often the answer that I hear is start with your own operations, like kind of start small in terms of, are you buying renewable power? Like, maybe buy carbon credits to offset your office space, or take public transportation to work. I would go the opposite direction, which is more of like, for us, all of that stuff that I just mentioned, like our offices, our retail stores, in the scheme of our carbon footprint, is like less than 5% of our carbon footprint. It's the most easy for us to control theoretically, but it's small from an impact perspective. The single biggest lever or biggest portion of our carbon footprint is our raw materials. And that's where I would say to start, because I think there's a bit of a misperception that you have no control over your materials, that like that's somewhere deep in the supply chain and far removed from any decision-making power you have. But ultimately, as the designer of the brand, you're the one buying. And so if you design your product with Tencel or organic cotton or other sustainable natural materials, that's sort of the single biggest thing you could do to get going out of the gate. You may not be able to develop your own materials or like have the leverage with suppliers to develop new materials, but there's plenty of options off the shelf that are really low carbon and much better from a sustainability perspective than the typical most common materials.
Thank you. And then in terms of Allbirds, how does Allbirds measure success in terms of the triple bottom line of sustainability?
Of course, as I mentioned, like we're doing our B Corp certification, so we have that score, and then we have like carbon footprint and other sustainability metrics built into our top line business objectives every year. But I'd say probably the biggest piece is this carbon neutral commitment. And the way that we account for that is that we impose a carbon tax upon ourselves. And so for every pair of shoes that we produce, there's an associated dollar amount that accounts for the environmental impact of that pair that gets put into a fund. And at the end of the year, we use that money to net out the carbon footprint of our business. And that is just a line item on our P&L. Like it is a very real cost that the business has to manage. And I think we're starting to see more and more companies sort of talk about environmental impact in financial terms and say like our environmental P&L was X, but I think we all need to go the step further to not just talk about it in terms of a cost, but then actually pay that cost. And that over time helps to reduce the footprint of the company itself.
Thank you so much. And we're going to go back to Jordana.
Thank you. So that's been I mean, everything you said is so fascinating to me. And I think you guys are doing so many things in the right direction to really go towards full sustainability in the way that it should be, especially with shoes. So congrats. I do have a question because I feel like a big issue, even with the end consumer, with like the education behind, you know, what you said, not really knowing what is sustainability and just having that phrase, money and something being more expensive when it's sustainable is something that always comes to play in a lot of times, which, you know, it's understandable because of supply and demand. So with that, all these sustainable practices that you mentioned, does it add a large cost to making your items? And how can a company remain profitable while being sustainable? So just a little bit in that regard, it's like just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it is really tough. Like, it's always a bit of a pet peeve of mine when people talk about sustainability as like a win-win-win, because oftentimes today it is more expensive and it takes longer and it's harder. When you talk about sustainable materials, they're more expensive. Ocean shipping takes more time. And I think, so a big part of it is just like willpower on the brand side to say, I'm going to pay those costs because it's the right thing to do. But the way that Allbirds has addressed that is, yes, our cost of goods is higher than a typical shoe would be because we're using these premium natural materials. However, you can offset that cost through innovative business models. So the fact that we don't do wholesale, we all have that direct relationship with the customer. Therefore, we don't lose out on those margins upstream. And that allows us to invest more in the product and keep the price point around the same as you would buy a sneaker elsewhere. So I think that's one thing. And then secondly, certainly these decisions and the authenticity of our brand increases brand loyalty. It makes our customer base really strong and increases the lifetime value of our customer. And then third, when we talk about something like a carbon tax, it is absolutely a cost today that we aren't required to be paying. But again, if we take this like longer term stakeholder based approach to business, we believe ultimately a carbon tax is something we're all going to have to pay. And so if we start building it in today, and again, using that to drive our carbon footprint down, that will be ahead in the long term. But you do, again, need leadership that's ready to take that long-term view.
That's awesome. And I think, what you said about not doing wholesale, but, having that one-on-one consumer interaction, I think that goes a much longer way when it comes to the lifeline of a brand, especially today. So that's really cool. Yeah. So thank you for that answer. And I think we're gonna go to Q&A now. So yeah.
Okay, so we do have a couple questions that we got emailed to us throughout the week. So I'm gonna start off with Tamara's question, which is, what are the skill sets that Allbirds looks for in their designers?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. So mostly because at Allbirds, sustainability sits on the product team, which is a little bit unusual, but I think is absolutely the place it needs to be, since product is really the engine of the company. And so I sit alongside our design team, and I'd say for Allbirds specifically, our design intention, we say the right amount of nothing. So it's this like very stripped back, simple, classic design style. And that really bodes well for sustainability because we have fewer components, like less niche processes that we have to add on to the shoe. And so it's that like really simple, classic take. Also, I would say like we've just started to hire our first kind of industry designers. Like for a while there, we didn't have anyone who had designed a shoe before. We had people who had designed furniture and electronics, and I think that led to a lot of the out of the box thinking at the beginning to say, we don't need to design shoes the way they've always been done. And so that kind of like fresh perspective or willingness to think outside the box is also really important.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's really interesting because you would never associate like a furniture designer with shoes, but that's really cool. So the next question is, Amy asks about consumers wanting a sustainable closet, so kind of the younger demographic these days. Have you ever thought about how to leverage the Allbirds customers' desire to purchase only what they need? So as a fashion brand, you know, you want to push as much product and have the client love every color and everything like that, but how do you kind of reverse that and change that narrative?
Allbirds probably has gone in the reverse direction, where we, for the first like couple years of our business, only had one shoe in like a couple colors, and built an enormously successful business on just that, which is pretty amazing. And also just proved early on that was possible, that like we didn't need seasons and we didn't need a portfolio of 100 products in order to have a successful business. And I think now the approach that we take is, obviously we have more than one product these days, but the approach that we take is like really making sure that the product that we're designing for fills some sort of need, like the need is identified before the product is created. So with like our next shoe, it was the idea that like a wool sneaker isn't great in warm climates. And so how can we make a more breathable like summer sneaker? And that is ultimately stemming from a desire to disrupt each of these categories and again show that like the synthetic based norm or standard isn't the only way. But it like quite frankly is an internal tension that we face all the time of like wanting to break into new categories and make new products, but also wanting to stick to this like integrity and ethos of kind of just the right amount of nothing. So we'll see, but it's something we think about very intentionally.
Yeah, I'm sure. It's definitely something that's very specific to the fashion industry. Like, how do you balance that? I'm actually going to turn it over to Juliet for the chat box questions.
So we have a question from Connie, and she asks, do you take customer products back when they're no longer wanting or needing them? So I guess how does Allbirds make sure that all of their products are participating in like the circular product life cycle?
Yeah, this one has been quite difficult for us, I think, given that we started in footwear, which is probably the hardest thing to try to recycle, given the components and the different types of materials that you're using, foams and textiles all in one piece. From the beginning, we have offered like a very generous 30 days, no questions asked return window. And so we do have this stream of products coming back, not all of which can be put back on the shelf. And so we partnered with an organization called Souls for Souls from the very beginning to donate our product, which they then use they then donate to what's called micro entrepreneurs who then sell the product to generate income in developing countries. And then we're testing all sorts of things on the back end about like re-commerce and figuring out how to extend the lifetime of our products. And then at the like far end of things for the shoes that like truly can't be worn again by anyone, I think we're experimenting again with ways of downcycling those, of creating like regrind material or building insulation, but the landscape is really fragmented and has been really difficult for us to find like an institutional partner who can handle that. And so if anyone knows of anything, please let us know. But we're like constantly prototyping different options, especially figuring out like how we can retain those materials and use them in our own operations and retail stores specifically. We think is a really exciting opportunity.
It's definitely an ongoing process. And then Mira has a question. She has two questions. First one, given the current state of how plastics and textiles don't really get recycled, is it in Allbirds' strategic roadmap to develop a robust recycling model to transform post-consumer waste to renewable materials? So pretty much.
Yes, fair question. Absolutely. That's like the North Star ultimate goal. We're still working out how to get there.
And then her second question was, has Allbirds thought about expanding to rental models? And is that even possible?
Yeah, I think it depends on the product. I don't know that you want to be like sharing shoes, maybe. But at like the price point and like the type of garment that we're offering, which is like not high end by any means, and is designed to be accessible and worn every day, rental hasn't seemed like the right like product business model fit. But certainly depending on what categories we get into the future, it's a great option from a sustainability perspective.
And then we have a question from Jonathan. He says, what is the biggest obstacle Allbirds has experienced in the brand's journey to carbon negative?
Yeah, I think that the biggest obstacle was that figuring out how to replace all like synthetics in the shoe with natural materials, particularly in that like bottom unit part of the shoe, which for a while, we had the common synthetic based version and over time worked to replace it. And that took many years and really close partnership and a huge investment with a partner in Brazil to make that happen. But ultimately we found a solution to that. I think still it's this like perception that natural materials aren't durable enough, don't perform as well as synthetics. I think that's something you hear a lot in the footwear industry and the outdoor industry. And it takes a while to demonstrate that something else is possible. It also takes a lot of willpower and conviction to take that risk, to do something in a way that hasn't been done before. And so how do we continue to make products with natural materials without degrading performance, and while keeping everything really simple and not just adding reinforcements and adding other parts to kind of bolster the natural materials.
And then I think, we're seeing more. Oliver has a question. Are Allbirds manufacturing plants powered by renewable energy sources?
Currently, we do not have any like on-site renewables I think one of our factories is looking at adding a solar system. Mostly, as we've looked at that option, we found it to be incredibly difficult because we don't own our factories. They're around the world. We don't have 100% of the factory. Like we're in there working with a lot of other brands as well. And so actually investing to put renewables on site has been difficult, but what we do instead is really think about the power that factory is accepting from the national grid or the regional grid. And so we're optimizing for countries to manufacture in countries that have a higher percentage of renewables at the grid level. And then, so that helps inherently reduce our footprint. And then on the back end, as part of our carbon neutral commitment, making sure we purchase the credits to net that out. And then that said, in places like our San Francisco headquarters in San Francisco, where the utility has a renewable power option, like we're certainly looking at that systematically and opting in where we can. But the on-site installation piece hasn't made sense yet, but certainly would as we grow.
I'm just going to interrupt super fast. Kathy has a question. I just want to call on her really quick.
Hi, Hannah. Thank you. I had a question. Earlier this year, I read that Allbirds and Adidas formed a partnership, and I was really excited to hear about that. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, that's certainly been one of the most exciting projects that I've gotten to work on in my tenure. Essentially, for those who haven't been aware, Allbirds and Adidas announced a partnership a few months ago that together we're going to try to create the lowest carbon footprint shoe possible. And I'm super excited about this because our industry talks about collaboration all the time. Usually the way that we talk about collaboration is in terms of these like high level directional platitudes, like we commit to reducing our carbon footprint by 2050. I think there's certainly a place for those kinds of things, but we also, and what I would say we probably need more is like near term, shoulder to shoulder collaboration at the like operational level where we're like sharing insights directly, sharing best practices in manufacturing and which suppliers are you using for this? Like, how have you been able to purchase renewable power? And that is what this partnership aims to do, is to both like have relationships on a working team level and actually co-develop a product, but then also to have that product come out. I don't think we've announced exactly when it'll come out, but certainly in the next couple of years versus 30 years from now, to actually demonstrate progress and generate excitement that this kind of thing is possible. And for us, that kind of goes hand in hand with our carbon footprinting labeling initiative, because it was this, obviously, in deciding to announce that, the concern came up that, well, if we put out our carbon footprint, somebody else could turn around and have a lower carbon footprint than us. And are we prepared for that? Like, what are the chances of that? And very quickly we were like, if somebody had a lower carbon footprint and they published it, like that would be a huge victory. Like, not only would we get people talking about carbon, but we'd actually be incentivizing competition towards a lower carbon future. And that's exactly the type of competition we need. And so we're really excited about the Adidas partnership in showing how two companies can actually work collaboratively towards that future. And, you know, we bring this like upstart culture and ability to take a little bit more risk and try new materials and bring some of the innovations we've already done to the partnership. But of course, Adidas brings decades of expertise in manufacturing and supply chain and logistics that we just don't have as much experience with. So it's a great melding for a lot of reasons.
Thank you. It's very exciting.
Okay. And Andrea asked, does Allbirds use or foresee using 3D technology for the creation of prototypes and samples as an additional sustainability opportunity? And then Mira kind of asked a similar question about the future of recyclable products 10 years from now. So to combine them, kind of like, what do you foresee is the future of sustainability and the innovation that goes into that?
Yeah, I think we're definitely looking at 3D prototyping and different ways of prototyping, both from a sustainability perspective and from a COVID perspective. Like, things are taking longer. We can't just send teams over to our factory for a week to do rapid prototyping. So we're definitely looking at different ways of doing that. I think from like a future of materials innovation, what I'm most excited about is, I think, what Andrea touched on, which is like that nature already has a lot of the solutions. It's not as if we need to, in many cases, we don't need to invent like super high tech new materials. For us, what we're most excited about is the power of natural materials to get to a carbon negative future, so that, you know, trees and plants are naturally very efficient carbon sucking machines. They're taking in carbon dioxide through photosynthesis. We're storing it in the plants themselves, in the soil, and we aim to accelerate that process and increase that process through regenerative farming techniques. And ultimately, we believe that is the key, that synthetic materials, no matter how many times you recycle them, are a finite resource that are only going to get less bad and less bad the more you recycle, whereas natural materials have the potential to go below zero, and actually sequester or result in more carbon being stored than is needed to produce the materials. And that's the only way we get to a carbon zero future. And so like back to the question of like advice for future sustainability practitioners or designers, like leapfrog the whole recycled synthetics thing, and that's just a bridge to get us to this future of natural, renewable, biodegradable materials, and that's where I think the exciting innovation will be.
All right, thank you. And we have time for one more question, and the last question is from Mira. In terms of consumers' understanding of sustainability, what does Allbirds find as the most common misconception?
I think mostly the challenge that we face is in communicating is that some aspects of sustainability are more straightforward or are more tangible than others. And so while people seem to really understand plastics and the need to recycle and even the issue of ocean plastics, carbon and climate change is a much different picture to try. It's a much more difficult picture to try to paint. And so again, we're like constantly looking for ways to make that more tangible to the customer, whether that's trying to build like a library of carbon footprints of everyday objects so that they can start to contextualize it. Or as I was saying earlier, before we started, we just published a new video on our website that goes into detail about what's included in a carbon footprint. And we had a comedian from New Zealand from the group Flight of the Conchords narrate it to make it more engaging and more exciting to our customer. And so, yeah, less of a misconception per se, and more that we're constantly looking for different ways to try to tell this pretty complicated story, but is the one that we believe is the most important one to be talking about, and is sort of the beating heart, if you will, of all of the other issues. And so we're just lucky that we have a leadership team and a marketing team that sees that as a fun challenge and not something to shy away from or give up on.
I 100% agree. And then we're going to go back to Jordana for last words.
So first, loved everything you said, and I couldn't agree more with the natural resources and that being the way forward with innovation. Funny enough, one, I'm in Brazil now, and I know sugarcane is something very common here, but two, I had a panel earlier today with Amanda Parks at Pangaea, and she spoke a lot on biofabrication and high-tech naturalism and how that was really the way forward. So it's great to see so many amazing brands kind of going towards that same path, which I think is super important and it's the right path. So I do have one last question for you from my side. What do you know now, being that you guys are doing so many, different initiatives towards sustainability at Allbirds, and you've always been doing them from the beginning and having, the trial and error and what works. What do you know now that you wish you knew when you started working and implementing sustainable practices?
I think one of my biggest realizations has been just that it's always better to do something the right way from the beginning. That it's so much harder to clean things up later. And I think like starting a company or working at a smaller company, there's always that frenetic energy of like, we just got to get it done. We've got to get it out the door. We've got to move quickly. And I would just say like, avoid that temptation at all costs. And I'm so glad that at Allbirds, we've been so methodical about it. For example, all of our tree product, anything that we make, whether it's lumber for our retail stores or our packaging or our Tencel-based shoe, we require Forest Stewardship Council certification. And that enables us to say 100% of our product is certified by the Forest Stewardship Council. And it also means that as we go out and make new product, that expectation carries forward. And that was one of the smartest things we did, I think, versus saying like, oh, that's too hard, we'll think about it later. So always, I'd say like start strict, start with what you think is absolutely best, and then figure out how to scale and adapt that over time.
I love that. I think that goes with any type of industry, but I mean, I think that's phenomenal. So thank you so much for that. So I'll let Andrea finish it up, but I've learned so much from you today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I agree. I've learned a lot too. And thank you so much, Hana. First of all, I just want to say, I love your mission of protecting the environment. I love how you talked about how you all started out from scratch and the out of the box thinking with people from, other industries. We have so much to learn, and sustainability really is an interdisciplinary subject. So I was really excited about that. But through Fashion Decks, who reaches out to us mainly are young designers trying to do things another way, or at LAM with students. I mean, the conversation is there is so much CO2 in the air, there is so much plastic in the ocean, there is so much waste, right? And they almost sometimes have a sense of hopelessness, and as Paul Hawkins says, it's not a time of despair, it's a time of opportunity. But it is a time of opportunity. So what keeps you so optimistic? And what's your just kind of final insights to our attendees about, what they can, just the possibilities right now, and why we should be optimistic and all of that?
Yeah, I think what most keeps me optimistic are the people that you're talking about, are the people that you've had on these talks over the last number of weeks, like my peers at other companies. I think just knowing that there's this like new movement of really smart people trying to do things differently gives me hope. One, because, as we've seen, especially as we've all altered our worlds almost entirely in the last 6 months, like we are capable of swift action. It just takes a threshold. Like we just have to reach that threshold of people who want to live in a different way. And then two, that as we've seen it with our trajectory at Allbirds, as one or two people are successful in pushing the boundaries and changing the assumption that things have to be done a certain way, like that then eliminates all excuses for the rest of the industry. And so we need more and more of these upstarts who are willing to take a risk, do things differently, and then they kind of pull the curve forward. And I think, we kind of have to believe in this future. It seems like there's no other way to live and feel fulfilled. Like I know that I need to be able to look back at the end of my career and to my children and say, I was on the right side of this. Like I really tried and hopefully succeeded. But I think it's just that conviction of like, how do you try to create the future that you want to see.
Wow. I'm like almost in tears. That was amazing. And you and your work at Allbirds is optimistic. I mean, when I kind of think, I always do say to students, look at the companies that are really changing, and they're doing it quickly. And like you said, we are capable of action. Can we do it? Yes, we can. So with that, thank you so much, Hana. Thank you. And thanks Jordana and Juliet and Rebecca and Kathy and all of you who asked so many great questions. Thank you to the whole Allbirds team. And Monica, take it away. Thank you so much, Hana. Thank you. And thanks Jordana and Juliet and Rebecca and Kathy and all of you who asked so many great questions. Thank you to the whole Allbirds team. And Monica, take it away.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Thank you, everyone. And I would like to give a big thank you to our sponsors, EcoLife Yarns, Kendor Textiles, and the Accessories Council. Please join us next week. We have FashionX has teamed up with Allied Textile at the Sustainable Fashion Forum, October 7th through 9th. Wednesday, October 7th, there'll be a conversation on sustainability and fashion with Cotopaxi and Free People. This is from 10 to 11 Pacific Standard Time or 1 to 2 Eastern Standard Time. We have Annie Agel and Julie Verdugo. You can find information at fashiondex.com/forum for more information. Then on Thursday, we'll have a conversation with influencers on brand management, equity, and sustainability in fashion. Speakers will be Eddie Rodman Jr. of Rodman Enterprises PR and Brand Management, Valerie Ikuva, I can't even say her name properly, Ekuvan, You Belong Now, and Anna Kerr, and Terrence Coffey from Tea Coffee Events, professor at LIM College and FIT. We also have co-moderators Riley Bott from LIM College and Rebecca Margolis from FashionDex. And finally, on Friday, October 9th from 10 to 11 Pacific Standard Time, we will have sustainability and sourcing with local and domestic suppliers. Speakers will be David M. Prentice on Point Manufacturing, Beth Esquinet from Unspun, Anna Livermore from V. Mora, Marta Miller from Lefty Production Company, and Diva Lumba from Eagle Fabrics. Again, information can be found at fashiondex.com/forum. While you're at fashiondex.com, please feel free to click on the store tab where you'll see the latest in textbooks and online sourcing. That is all for today. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy your weekend.
Thank you all so much. Is Hana still on? Oh, no, she clicked off. Thanks, Megan.
Thank you. That was great.
That was great. That was
Thanks,
terrific.
guys.
Rebecca and Julia.